Peter Cowley was an entrepreneur, angel investor, and for many years was the Naked Scientist technology commentator, a role he fell into by accident, actually, when we met one evening at an investment meeting. He also became a good friend. But his life, in many respects, despite being incredibly successful, was also touched by great sadness. Peter lost 2 sons and struggled with alcoholism for a while. But he came through all that, and he lived his life with energy, curiosity, and generosity. He died from lung cancer late last year. But not long before that happened, we sat down together to record probably one of the last interviews he gave about his remarkable life. As we'll hear, his diagnosis was just one chapter in a life that was lived to the fullest. He wrote a book about it called Public Success, Private Grief, and I began by asking him to read us an extract from the way it opens.
Around 7 p.m, Lisbeth and I were just about to go out when the phone rang. It was the neurologist from the hospital who asked me if I had someone with me. He told me I had 4 tumours in my brain, the largest of which measured 17 millimetres across and was pressing on my cerebellum, causing the balance problem. We were completely stunned. All the pieces from the previous week very quickly fell into place as we realised how the GP and the neurologists had been protecting me. The GP by fast-tracking me and the radiographers by not letting me see the images of my brain, all while trying to get a quick diagnosis. A diagnosis that they had clearly foreseen and feared all along. The scales well and truly fell from our eyes at that moment, as we stood in the kitchen with our coats on, while he went on to explain gently that they thought these tumours in the brain were secondary tumours. What did this mean? What would lie ahead of us? I now know that people do also get benign brain tumours, but at that moment all I thought was my life's in danger, and meanwhile my quality of life will be heavily compromised. What can be done? What can I do?
Peter Cowley will be well known to long-term listeners of The Naked Scientist. He and I first met nearly 15 years ago, and he became our technology correspondent. And you said to me earlier that it was tens of episodes, you totted it up, that you've been in.
Yeah, I taught 83 episodes over a period of about 7 years, so about once a month, about all kinds of interesting subjects.
So how old are you now?
So I'm just coming up to 69, so we met when I was in my mid-50s.
And you got this diagnosis about 2 years ago?
Yeah, about 2.5 years ago, the end of 2021. I was 66 years old at that point. I got this diagnosis.
And that's what we're going to dwell on in this conversation, both how you've arrived at this point with your diagnosis, but also as part of our radio programme, and the fact that your life has had some enormous ups and downs, which has provoked you to actually write the book that you're reading from. Just tell us a bit about this book.
So the book I wrote, having written a couple of business books about angel investing, which we'll come on to, I wrote this book as a sort of final legacy. I don't expect statistically to live more than another year or so, into sometime in 2025. And so having lived a life, as you've just pointed out, with tremendous downs, some good ups and very busy life, I decided that I would write something that hopefully will be inspirational to others in whatever form, whether it's whatever they can learn from me, from the way I've coped with these downs.
You went to university, to the University of Cambridge, where you studied engineering, wasn't it? And did that set you on the track that took you to becoming an angel investor?
Indirectly it did, because I learnt a lot about engineering, a lot about computer science. That was the second part of my degree. And then I worked in the software industry for a bit before joining a small business in Bavaria. And from there on, I was going to become entrepreneurial. I was really, a number of things that happened before that, which meant I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. And the better angel investors, I say better not because of success, but because how they can help their investees are entrepreneurs. And then I morphed into being an angel investor many years later.
And that's how you and I met. We'll come on to that a bit later on. Tell us about those early years then. What did you do in Bavaria, and how did that culminate in you becoming the person you are today?
Yeah, so after working in London for a little bit, I joined a company in Bavaria. As it turns out, it was going bust, sold itself, and 2 of us set up our own business, a company called Gercom. Came back to the UK once our eldest was born, who's now 40, and I've been an entrepreneur ever since in technology and in property. So I just decided to take the risk, get the rewards. Sometimes I describe myself as a mediocre entrepreneur, and as it turns out, a very successful angel investor. So that led me on a path to be interested in all kinds of different businesses, business ideas, taking risks, enjoying the fruits of that.
And what was the lifestyle like?
Oh, that's a good question. The lifestyle was unfortunately that I was spending probably too much time with growing businesses, particularly Cam Data, which I still have after 40 years, and not enough time with the family. But we had money, my wife and we traveled a lot, and I worked very hard. And really enjoyed that. That was the early stages. It's changed a lot as an angel investor, as we'll see soon.
One of the things that you were very frank to me about right from the beginning was that you had problems with alcohol in the past. Do you think that it was that early lifestyle that may have got that started?
Probably not. I think I have an addictive gene of some form. One of my uncles was an alcoholic. My sister died of alcoholism. My mother was an alcoholic for a while. I think the intensity of life, the fact I married somebody who also drank a lot, the fact I lived in Bavaria, the difficulties I had when this business failed, my brother died young, led to me drinking more and more to the point where I was using it as an anaesthetic and an escape mechanism.
But then it became a really quite serious and significant and problematic part of your life. Let's hear the next bit from the book.
Yeah, so this bit is in early September 1999, I went to Scotland with Matt, my son, who was 15 at the time, to climb Ben Nevis. What happened next is something I am more ashamed of than almost anything else in my life. Showing the madness of the practicing alcoholic, I drank while driving all the way up to Scotland. Matt decided I was too drunk, so he confiscated my car keys and rang a friend in Stamford, where I lived. The friend then contacted my parents, who drove up to rescue Matt. They were in their 70s. It was agreed that I would have the car keys back and carry on. My parents and Matt would stay the night in a hotel and take him home the next day. The next day, I mixed a half a litre of gin with orange juice to disguise the alcohol, which I drank as I successfully climbed and then descended the highest mountain in the UK. Back in Fort William, I jumped in the car in order to drive some or all of the 450 miles back home. I remember little of the next few hours apart from the fact that I got lost in Glasgow. This was before sat-navs. 2 hours later, I stopped on the side road to relieve myself and got the car stuck on the verge. A kind passerby helped me push the car back onto the tarmac and also, as it turned out, rang the police to say I was drunk behind the wheel. Without me noticing, a marked police car started to follow me and stayed with me for many miles down the M6 motorway until I stopped at a service area near the Lake District. The police car parked next to my car and the officer beckoned me over. I sat in the passenger seat of his car as he told me that I hadn't committed any traffic offences, so he could not stop me any earlier. I remember, to my embarrassment, uttering the words, "It's a fair cop." After drink driving for many years, I'd been caught, miraculously without having injured myself or anyone else, and I felt I was getting my due comeuppance. I'd had a few close shaves. For instance, just before Christmas the previous year, the police were stopping everyone and looking at drivers, but not breathalyzing them unless they suspected them of being over the limit. I'd been drinking in the car, but looked respectable, drove a nice car, and so made the assumption I wouldn't be a drink driver. This time round, I was breathalyzed and found to be more than 3 times over the limit, taken to the police station, breathalyzed again, charged, and placed in a police cell.
When I read that, I was really struck to think that someone like you would have something like that happen to them.
Yes, I mean, if you look at it in terms of my intellect, logically I should have been able to work out where I was, but it was an addiction. It was something that would take complete control of me in terms of sourcing alcohol every day, drinking, trying to avoid drinking. And I was doing this in a way that I thought I was on top of it, but I wasn't. Alcohol was completely in control of my life. It was more important to me than anything else, including my children, my wife, my parents.
If you'd been asked at that point, did you regard yourself as an alcoholic?
Very good question. When I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous, which was 6 months before, it was just after I got banned, I would go into the meeting and I would say, "I'm Peter, I'm an alcoholic." But I was still drinking at that point. But if you go back the few years before that, when I was still drinking very heavily, no, I was in denial that it wasn't a problem. The fact that I was drinking at breakfast time, to stop the shakes because the delirium tremens kicks in if you don't take another drink. The fact I was putting a cloth over my mouth to stop myself gagging when I had that first drink of the day. All these things I just thought was just the way it was.
Tell us about that then, because as a doctor, I'm intrigued by that. You can tell this is awful for you and it's making you feel terrible. but you're still compelled to do it.
Yes, it's a combination of two things, really. There's a physiological dependence, of course, which is why I was getting the DTs. And I did actually have an epileptic fit on my parents' floor at one point because they lived next door to me. And the anaesthetising I was doing of something at the time I couldn't work out, but with therapy and time, I gradually got my head around why I need that effect. There's not a logical, intellectual connection here. It's a physiological connection.
You say in the book, though, that the people you worked with knew this was happening and they started to make allowances, or they would make plan Bs for if Peter didn't pull it off or couldn't turn up to work or was in too much of a state to handle the meeting. They were actually making allowances or putting other people up so that you wouldn't have to appear.
That's correct. In fact, I had somebody work for me who would drive me if I was drunk, even to customers. She'd answer the phone as long as she was there. If I wasn't there, I'd answer drunk, potentially. I wasn't completely drunk the whole time. I wasn't, I was what they call a functioning drunk. So I was actually still running a business, having a relationship, etc. But I remember our biggest customer, who's in the retail sector, actually, we sold electronic stuff to them, knew I was a drunk, and he still carried on doing business with me. So he, to some extent, was supporting my alcoholism.
So at what point did something switch over to make you think, I need to combat this? I've got to confront this and make changes.
I went to rehab 3 times. The first time I got pushed in there by my wife and parents after the epileptic fit. That didn't work at all. 6 months later, I felt I must do something about it. So I went to another rehab place, spent 5 weeks there, didn't have another drink for 5 months, and then thought, oh, I'm cured now. I can have a social drink. Back onto the vodka within 3 or 4 weeks. And it was only when my children wouldn't talk to me any longer, my parents had run away from the area and moved back up to Yorkshire, that I suddenly got to the point where, in fact, at the time I was doing some lighting for a amateur dramatics, and I was doing that so I wouldn't drink during the day so I could do the lighting in the evening. That worked really well until the first night when I started drinking in the morning, and of course I don't remember anything of that day at all. So I somehow did the lighting. I have a clue. This was Night of the Iguana. I have no clue what happened on stage. The next day I started drinking again in the morning straight away. I fell and somebody noticed me, a friend who was doing my driving, because I lost my driving license by that point, fell and just missed gouging one of my eyes out. And I was just at that stage there where I was drunk enough but sober enough for him to very kindly say, do you think you should go to rehab again? So I went to rehab again. The important part of that was I was already going to AA, and this rehab is based on AA. So you come out of rehab, frightening world, alcohol in every corner, into the support of the AA network. And that's why I'm convinced I remain sober the 24 years till today.
Why is it that someone who has an alcohol problem can't have a social drink?
Well, of course they can. You do get people who still have social drinks, even though they've got an alcohol problem. And that situation, they're probably not classed as an alcoholic any longer. But it's much safer not to have a drink, because do we need drink? I'm just as lively and friendly and all the rest other things I was as a drunk, but I'm not using alcohol.
Very intriguing thing you've written in this book on this subject, where you've said, as you approach the end of your life, maybe you will have a drink. Now, were you being playful when you said that? Or is there still a love affair in your mind with alcohol? And so you're thinking, well, maybe I will do that as I near the end.
I am being playful, of course, but at the same time, it might be serious. I might go back to needing that anaesthetic towards the end of my life. But getting the timing right, I am terminally ill. We're all terminally ill. Life is a terminal illness anyway. At what point will I get to the point where I'm convinced I'm going to die within, say, 3 or 4 weeks? Because I know, assuming I have access to the alcohol, I'm going to screw up those last 3 or 4 weeks. And if you look at it, if I'm going to screw those up, I can't let my son down, my wife down in that way. So it is playfully said.
Let's hear the next bit from the book.
It was late July 2009, and I hadn't heard from Ian for a few weeks. We mostly communicated by text message with occasional calls. As mentioned above, he'd been living in Glastonbury for the last couple of years, not working but living off the inheritance from maternal grandparents. I had texted him several times because I wanted to tell him about the annual reunion of Focus 12, the drug and alcohol rehabilitation charity where I was chair of the trustees, and about my visit to my dad, his granddad, who was now alone after my mother died 16 months earlier. But Ian hadn't replied. This was the days before WhatsApp, and it wasn't possible to see if a text had been received and if it had been read. I was becoming more and more uneasy, and I had contacted one of his close friends who told me Ian was in a better place than he'd been for a while. On Tuesday, 11th of August 2009, I was working at my desk after having dinner with Alison, her children, and Alan, who were now sitting in the lounge next door watching TV. My mobile phone rang at 10:45 p.m. I picked up the phone. The caller asked, "Who's that?" I said, "Peter Cowley," and I immediately asked the same question back. It was late at night and it was an unknown number. He said he was a police officer, giving his name, rank and police station. He was called Jared. He went on to explain that the body of a young man had been washed up that day in a small cove along the coast near Bristol. A farmer had found him and the body had been taken to a morgue, but although he was clothed and wearing a rucksack, his only possession was a £10 note. The body had some unusual tattoos and they had checked his fingerprints against the national database. The fingerprints appeared in the database under Ian's name and were linked to a mobile telephone number. That number was mine. I said I didn't believe him and that I would ring his police station. Jared gave me the number, which I checked on the internet. I rang him back in total shock. He explained that Ian had been fingerprinted after an incident some time ago when he'd been stopped for jumping over a London Underground barrier. Ian had given his real name, but my mobile number rather than his own.
Tell us, who was Ian?
Ian was my middle son. So I had three sons, Matt, Ian and Alan, with 2 years between them, so there was 4 years in total. Ian had struggled at school. He'd actually got involved with drugs and then had spent some time after school, the next 5 years, travelling around the world, seeing the world, and he'd settled in Glastonbury. He'd become extremely spiritual in Ladakh, where he lived for a while, and Glastonbury is a new age, unusual environment where he thrived. He thrived because he didn't have to work, because of the inheritance, and because he was loved by all there.
What changed for him?
I believe that he became more and more spiritual, and he believed that the future was in a spiritual world rather than the physical world. Should also add that his mother, at that point my ex-wife, had died 3 years beforehand of a pulmonary embolism, probably a DVT that spread on an aircraft to South Africa. So he was missing her terribly, and he also believed strongly the spiritual life was better. And so I believe my narrative that I created over the next months and years, having spent a lot of time trying to, with the police, to find out what went on, I believe that he died happily, having decided to be in another world.
Do you blame what was happening to you in ahead of this time, with the way your lifestyle had been and so on, as perhaps laying the ground that led him down the path that led to him thinking that?
I'd not had a drink for 9 years. I didn't pick up a drink then, so he'd seen me sober for 9 years. Obviously, when he was growing up, he suffered, as the other two children did as well, of my addiction. I got sober when he was 12 or 13 years old, and he'd moved in with me away from his mum, and so I spent a lot of time with him. We travelled a lot together. He will definitely have been affected by his upbringing, by my ex-wife. His mother also drank to excess, not alcoholically, I believe, but certainly drank to excess. And it was a really difficult upbringing. She was also very motivated by her profession, which is environmental consultancy, so she travelled a lot. So very difficult upbringing. I thought he'd recovered from that. He wasn't using drugs to a large extent, but a combination, I think, of her death and a really strong belief in an afterlife tipped him over the edge, and he took his life.
How did that affect you?
Terribly at the time, really terribly. I mean, not understanding what had gone on, the police suspected foul play, couldn't seem to find the last person who spoke to. I spent a lot of time down in Glastonbury and Bristol, at the same time trying to keep a work life working in Cambridge as well. I ended up being psychosomatically ill for some time. I obviously had therapy. I was going through all kinds of grief. It's taken me a long time to build this narrative up, which I'm now happy with. I'd already got busier because of after being an alcoholic is really tough in terms of number of hours. You end up only having a few hours a day that you can use, and if then you don't drink any longer, you've given another 8 or 10 hours a day. I'd become pretty busy doing stuff, a lot of charitable stuff, a lot of entrepreneurial stuff, starting to build houses, etc. And I think I dug myself in even further, almost like an anesthetic, certainly an addiction. I'm convinced I was addicted to being busy, helping others, and I continue with that to an even greater extent.
So in some respects, it was a sort of springboard into becoming immersed in what did bring you pleasure and you were good at, which was the effectively making money. It's the entrepreneurial side, the running the business side. And you mentioned building houses, because I think you say in the book that you then started developing houses, building houses, and that was very successful because that brought in a nice big wad of cash.
I think it's unfair to say I was driven by money. The entrepreneurial and the charitable work is because I was driven by helping others. And so, as I've said many times on stage, all the angel investments I made, if I got all the money back plus £1, I would have been happy enough, more than happy, because I'd spent so much time with entrepreneurs a generation and a half younger than me who I was helping. So although I did make money, in fact, before Ian died, I made the money, it did give me some capital to start angel investing.
So that was effectively a nice nest egg you had there that meant you could then enter this world of angel investments. And for people who don't know what angel investing is, it's people like you who really help to catapult people with no track record, a new idea, very nascent kind of technologies and ideas, and give them a break, give them their first break often, isn't it? But that means very high risk.
Hugely high risk. I mean, angel investors are a combination of the people who put the money in, but also people like me who've had entrepreneurial skills who will help them with that. The figures they talk about is that 7 or 8 out of every 10 companies we back will fail. Huge high risk. Obviously, you wouldn't do that. No angel would do it if they were guaranteed not to get the money back at least and hopefully make a profit. So the risk in many things in capitalism generally, risk and reward go together. And although it's high risk, providing you have enough bets, you invest in enough businesses, you've got a pretty good chance of making a good return.
This is the perfect time to hear the next bit of the book.
And the United Kingdom Business Angel of the Year 2014 is Peter Cowley. 5 years after Ian's death, I was in the neo-Gothic Liverpool Cathedral, completed in the 1970s, and the largest religious building in the UK, seated at one of many beautifully decorated and atmospherically lit dining tables. We were all there for the annual awards ceremony of the United Kingdom Business Angel Association, the trade body for angel investing, run by its co-founder, Jenny Tooth. Angel of the Year was the last of about a dozen awards. Just a few minutes earlier, photographs of the 8 entrants had been displayed on a large screen, and I had started to feel quite nervous. Then, incredibly, my name was announced as the winner, and I went up to the stage to receive the beautiful glass award and say the few words I had scribbled down just in case I might need them. It was unbelievably special to be so honoured by the UK trade body in front of a community of 300, and especially in that location to be crowned Angel of the Year in a religious building as an agnostic is quite something.
I remember you winning that, and by then you'd started coming on our programme to come and talk about tech and some of the things that you were investing in. I remember that probably the most memorable was you turned up with a coffee maker. It was a good coffee maker, which we did on the programme.
The coffee maker was interesting because it was somebody I'd met at an entrepreneurial event in London, and I said, oh, this is an interesting device, new tech. How about I talked about it on the programme, which of course he was very pleased to have a bit of advertising effectively. So then he sent the coffee maker to the studio, so I had never seen it. And I was interviewed then it was Greer or somebody like that. And she'd used it, and I hadn't. And I had to pretend I was the one that knew what I was doing. And do you remember what happened there? Do you remember? No, she was describing it to it, and I was pressing a button, and she suddenly said, "Don't touch that," under a voice, but I'm sure was heard by the listener.
It was a good piece, but it actually made me think. I mean, a lot of the things that you came along and talked about, they were technologies that were emerging or things that weren't mainstream yet. And so they tended to make you think, because you'd think, oh, I never knew that. And most of the things that you put across, they would always in some way make me react by thinking, I never thought about it in that way. And I guess that's at the heart of angel investing, isn't it? It's being able to see that thing that's going to become something that will make people think and then realise the value of it.
Yes, we're trying to outguess the market effectively for usually a product, sometimes a service. But it takes in the UK about 10 years to build these businesses. So we've really got to look ahead, as the entrepreneur already has done, something that's 10 years out. Will there be a market for that thing 10 years out? But more than just will there be a market for it, will people be willing to pay enough that the company will actually make a profit? I mean, that's why it's crystal ball gazing, basically, with a very cloudy crystal ball, because you've just got to, they've come with this idea, this business plan, etc. You've got to then, as I say many times, you've got to invest in people with a plan, not a plan with people. So you've got to invest in the people because you also believe that their dream will work.
You've always thought big, and you have been a risk taker, and you always said to me, I'm an early adopter. You always turn up with the latest tech and that kind of thing. So did you embrace angel investing the same way you've embraced other aspects of your life, kind of in with both feet?
Unfortunately, I did to start with. That didn't work. So you can't see, obviously, but I've got 2 wearables on. I collect data about my health, about running. I've just done my 50th park run today, etc., etc. And so initially, I was starting to invest in products and markets and not in the people themselves. So I did jump in, like many angels do, with 2 feet into the wrong bucket. It was only later, about 3 years down the line, I began to realize this isn't the way to go about it. You've got to make sure you've got to invest in the people with an idea. So I am a bit, what's the word for it? I'm not impetuous, because I do analyse risk, but I will fall in love with something a bit too early.
When we started this conversation, you began by reading how you open the book, which was this terrible diagnosis 2 years ago, which actually you realised there was something wrong when you went on a skiing holiday and kept falling over to start with, wasn't it? Where are you now? What's actually happened since you got that diagnosis? You had metastatic tumours in your brain. Where did they come from, and how has it all been managed?
The imbalance was the thing that triggered the GP referring to a neurologist. And now the GP at that point was trying to check whether it was neurological or an ENT, a balance in the ear, though clearly he knew with hindsight, and I've been out for a drink with him since then. So the neurologist, as I said earlier, said it was secondary. What I've actually got is a primary lung cancer, a non-small cell lung cancer. And I've never smoked. And about 1 in 5 of all lung cancer sufferers have never smoked. And because the never smokers don't cough up anything, we're detected very late. So most of us have got this, will already metastasized. In my case, it was in the brain, it was in the liver, it was in the spine, it was in the hip, it was in the bones, it was in the lymph system. So this was really late. I had about 14 tumours. Luckily, I mean, it's very unlucky to get that, and lung cancer is still the biggest killer of cancer, even though it's not the most common. I was very lucky that some years ago, one of the big pharmaceutical companies had decided there's a big enough cohort of potential patients, they'd invest some money into designing something. And I never heard of targeted therapy before, but I have now. You've heard of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, etc. Targeted therapy is very specific and has very few side effects. And in my case, it's a tablet that I take every day. And 4 out of 5 people it works for. And in my case, again, my side effects, I've been incredibly lucky with the lack of side effects. I mean, because there are a few side effects, even though it's very targeted. So I've led a remarkably normal life, but at the same time accelerated. So I've had a very busy life, as we've known each other for 15 years. But I've done so much more. For instance, I slept on Antarctica earlier on this year. I've been to all 7 continents in a year. I've got time and I've got some money, so I've just got out there and travelled. But on top of that, of course, I've done other things like still be on investment boards and written the book. So I've been unusually busy in hopefully an inspirational way. I hope people look at me and think, yeah, just get on with life in these circumstances.
The tablet you've been taking is osimertinib, one of these designer drugs, which does hit specific tumours and puts them to sleep, effectively, doesn't it? Has that worked? I presume by the fact that you're here sitting talking to me 2 years on, it's been a success story.
Mostly. So, as with any cancer, they try to work itself around the therapy to try and particularly in this sort of thing where you're not being bombarded with chemotherapy on a regular basis. So, in my case, as it happens with most beetle cases, it did mutate. It mutated away from its specific mutation. The drug doesn't understand that. It effectively hides itself from the drug and is still, of course, hidden from the immune system. And it mutated. And it mutated in my hip and ended up, in fact, as it turns out, it was mutating heavily when I came to your 50th birthday party a year ago here in this house. And I haven't told you so far, but when we had the Cowley dancing, actually my hip was getting worse and worse during the evening, and we found out the following Wednesday what had happened. And I chose to have, because I've got a bit of money, private radiotherapy. I could have had NHS radiotherapy. I had some side effects from that for about a couple of months. But once I got through that, and this happened about a year ago, I got to the point where I did 2 half marathons in 2 weeks earlier this year in Cambridge and then in Lisbon. So I'm good. I've just had some scans a couple of weeks ago, and I've got the results in 10 days' time. And my scanxiety, as it's called, is gradually rising, and my wife's is even higher than mine. So who knows what it's going to be. If it's okay, if the scans work out okay, I then have another 3 months before the next scans, and I will carry on enjoying life. We're intending to go to the Arctic in August if we can.
You capture some of that in your last segment you've chosen from the book.
On the physical side, I still had some of the balance issues caused by the tumour in my brain, and it was predicted that this problem would continue for a while until the drug osimertinib started to work, and that the tumour would shrink along with the others. I continued to play golf, spectacularly badly due to my unsteadiness, but with great gusto and enjoyment. I was gifted a trip in a Spitfire aeroplane by 2 friends, and so I secretly increased my steroid dose for a few days in order to be able to walk to the plane in a straight line and not to be turned away by the pilot as unfit. An old university friend who was on his own cancer journey introduced me to the wonderful concept of the fuck it list, for all the things you don't actually need or want to do, the inverse of the bucket list. After about a month, in mid-February, we made our first regular trip to the oncologist, mostly discussed the side effects I was starting to experience, which were mainly skin-related and not too serious. I came to the consultation knowing that I had an invitation to speak on a panel in Paris for the European Research Council 3 weeks later. I was keen to go and to let them know as soon as possible that I was coming. There are things I really enjoyed doing, so I asked the oncologist if it was okay to travel. Well, it was probably a good idea to stay fairly close to home for the time being to see how the treatment beds in. I heard what you said, and I'm going to Paris. As we walked out of the hospital, Lisbeth was giggling next to me. Honestly, if you're going to ignore his advice, you need to tell him to his face. As we talked it over, we decided that it was just a train ride, no further than somewhere in the UK, really, and we were going to manage. We planned to make a bit of a holiday out of it with a trip to Reims as well as Paris.
So what's on the bucket list, and what has made the other famous list, the fuck it list?
So the bucket list, of course, that reading was over 2 years ago now, so a lot has been on the bucket list and come off the bucket list, including huge amounts of travel. We just come back from 6 weeks of hiking in the US Rockies. The important point here is that there's so many people on this drug. There's a lot of data about it, and statistically, one mutates about 18 months after coming on the drug, and that was almost exactly the time within literally a week that I mutated, and from there it's about 18 months to death, which will then lead me to early next year. Of course, we're all hoping and praying that it won't be like that, but I am being realistic about it. So the hope is there, but the realism. So this summer is mostly spent with very close friends going away. With one, I'm going at Ben Nevis. With another couple, I'm going to Belgrade. I'm going to Switzerland and Italy with another one. I'm going on a free expression course. I'm going on a butchery course with another couple. So this summer is really just to do with spending quality time, not just with friends, of course, but also with family. So Lisa and I are going to the Arctic if we can, and then we're going somewhere else. And we're going to France for our first wedding anniversary next week, in fact. So that leads through to September. So that's really my bucket list. The fuck it list isn't really a list, it's a decision process where if somebody asks me to do something, I don't say fuck it, I say No, I'm too busy for that. So I've got other priorities. So I wouldn't say there was anything specific on there, but there are certainly things that normally I would be expected to do by others I just won't do any longer.
It's been a real pleasure and privilege for me to have got to know you and to have had you be part of our journey, making radio programmes and things. Thank you for that and the friendship over the years. Is there anything you'd like to leave as a sort of parting, when we finish this conversation, message for everyone who's listened to you through our channels over the years?
Yes, this is a bit of a plug really, but the book is a difficult read. It's also a very easy read. You read it in one sitting. Other people have said that as well. But I hope, and the reason I did it and took 3 months out of my life when I could have been travelling and doing other things, was to create a legacy, an inspirational legacy. So I'm hoping that people will read it and somehow change something in their life. Maybe not now, maybe when they get older, just in some way. And that's already happening. I'm getting feedback. I had lunch with somebody yesterday who has stopped drinking because of it. You know, he wasn't drinking alcoholically, but he was drinking too much and he stopped drinking. That sort of thing is wonderful to hear. So, yeah, the book is called Public Success, Private Grief, available on Amazon, of course. There's lots of podcasts. I talk about this, including, of course, Chris's. And so if you are interested, please do pick up the book. That would certainly, my intention is to make a difference somehow, to have some sort of inspirational impact, and which unfortunately will likely to happen more after my death than before.
Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you.
Peter Cowley, who died in late 2024 at the age of 70. He is dearly missed by all of us who knew him.